Oh, hi. Welcome. I'm Tim Witt, and in this recipe, we're going to be looking at how to make drum and bass. The origins of drum and bass can be traced back to the early 1800s in a small European country of drum and bass. Or, more accurately, drum and bass's origins can be traced back to England in the early 90s, where a growing youth rave culture was quickly spawning a number of new electronic music genres. As the widespread use of dancing aids rose, so did the music's beats per minute, along with advancements in technology, allowing producers to push the boundaries of what was sonically possible and deliver more complex music. Hardware samplers facilitated the use of funk drum breaks, heavily edited and sped up, to create previously unheard of rhythms, while rave sound systems were becoming louder and more equipped to handle extremely low frequencies, which proliferated music genres that focused on bass so much that it would eventually become part of the title. Drum and bass can be most easily spotted by its high tempo, syncopated breakbeat, its focus on heavy, low-frequency bass lines, and extensive use of synthesized sounds. Notable artists include Goldie, Andy C, Pendulum, Rudimental. As drum and bass was and is still created predominantly for dancing to, you'll always find a DJ selecting the music and mixing each track together into one seamless blend for dancers to get their freak on. Subsequently, most songs will take a fairly standard form to make his job easier. A typical drum and bass arrangement will feature a BPM from 160 to 180, an intro, a build, drop, then a breakdown, second build, drop, then an outro. During their set, the DJ would typically link up the breakdown or outro of one song into the intro or build of the next song, utilizing the dynamics of the music to create an ebb and flow of energy to make each song transition more natural. As your track only needs to be 2 minutes in length, we will significantly shorten the length of each section, as drum and bass tracks can run for over 8 minutes, with extended intros, drops, and breakdowns. So, what elements are in a drum and bass track, I hear you ask? Well, if you just shut up and let me talk for a second, I'll tell you. Your typical drum and bass track will have 3 core elements: drums, bass, and then a pad or a synth, as well as embellishments such as vocal samples or a recorded vocalist. As the name implies, the drums are the main focus of drum and bass and are typically split into 2 sections. A punchy kick and snare, along with an additional top line, which is comprised of hi-hat and high-pass filtered drums to create the fast, syncopated rhythm over the top of the solid, pounding beat. You don't need a low-frequency kick drum here, as the bass line will take up all of the bottom end, so make sure to high-pass it at about 80 to 100 Hz. For the snare, using a sample that has a good amount of 200 Hz will give it a nice, fat sound. For additional tips on improving your drum sounds further, see the link below this video. As you would assume, drum and bass's second focus is upon the bass line, which deserves a lot of special attention as well. When selecting your bass line, make sure that it has a lot of sub-frequencies, down as far even as 30 Hz. For bass line mastery, you'll want to layer your bass line in 2 parts, playing the same notes, with one part high-passed from about 80 Hz and above, and a pure sine wave an octave down, playing the sub-bass below 80 Hz. The high-pass line will give your bass line clarity and grime, while the sine wave will give you a rich and smooth sub-bass. Native Instruments Massive is a synthesizer plugin which gets a lot of use, along with Serum from Transfer Records, spelled XFEER, but both are a little pricey. If you need to get started on the cheap, check the list below of free synthesizer plugins. Now that you've got your elements, you'll need to arrange them into some sort of song. Start with the intro, which will be low energy, which will have a pad and the top line of the drums. This will be used to mix in from the previous track. Then to the build-up, which will be an increase in energy. You have your pad, top line drums, a riser sound effect, and a kick drum increasing in pace. This is where the track starts to come into its own, building the crowd up towards the drop. Then you have the drop itself, which will be the highest energy. You have the top line of the drums, kick in the snare, high frequency bass, and then the sub bass. This is where the track kicks in with full power and the crowd will go batty. Then you have the breakdown, which will be the drop in energy, which will have the pad, top line of drums, kick and snare, and the high frequency bass. The breakdown gives the crowd a small rest, as you can't keep the power of the music at 10 all the time, or else it will tire out your audience, and they might burst into flames. Just like how you can't eat chocolate all day, every day, without getting sick of it and bursting into flames. Then the outro, which will be a similar energy to the intro for mixing into the next song. You have the top line drums, kick in your snare, high frequency bass. This is the end of the track, which will be geared towards making the transition into the next song easy. To make sure there's no sub bass and a sparse melody, keeping this section focused mainly on the drums. And that's it. With these basic elements, you should be able to go and start baking up some killin' drum and bass tunes. I hope you've enjoyed this recipe. The music used in this demonstration is from a sample pack which can be downloaded for free at Skiphonic Sounds. I'm Tim Witt.